Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my weekly video series in which I usually cover a single older board game gem. But I'm trying a different format this week. I've gotten a lot of great requests and suggestions, and there's a link in the description of this video that should take you to the list on BoardGameGeek in which you can offer your own requests or suggestions. Feel free to leave a comment if you have a particular game you're thinking of. For whatever reason, there are games that I don't want to cover with a full episode. So I thought I'd try this format. I haven't given it a name yet. And so these three are all suggestions, and they're all games that I probably wasn't going to get to cover very, very soon. So let's get started. So the first game I want to talk about is a game called Auf Achse. It was designed by Wolfgang Kramer and was published by, I think, originally a company called FX Schmidt. There have been releases from a number of different companies. I used to have one, and we had it in the restaurant, and it got wrecked. And I will say it's probably by a bunch of German tourists. And the reason I have deduced to that is because the game was in German, and I had it sleeved, and I had the English translations for the event cards in the sleeves, so people who didn't understand German could play the game. And whoever wrecked the game had taken all the cards out of the sleeves. So I think it was one or more people who spoke German. It's for 2 to 6 players, ages 8 and up, and takes about an hour to play. It really depends on number of players. You probably want the middle range, so 4 is a great number. 6 is going to kind of drag a little bit. It's going to be a long time before your turn comes around again. This is the sort of quintessential pick up and deliver game. I mentioned this in a previous video where I was talking about pick up and deliver games. I might have been Mercator. But to me, if you were to mention pick up and deliver as like a game mechanism, right? Pick up things, take them somewhere else, drop them off, and get paid. That's Auf Achse. The board has a map of Germany and cities connected by, road spaces. And each player has a little truck. And in the truck, they can put little items, little cubes in the version I had, little wooden cubes that go into the truck. And so you're actually physically, delivering the trucks, around Germany. But the idea is there are contracts in the game. Now, the idea of the contracts is that there's always a contract that's like, go to this location, pick up, 1 to 6, 2 to 6 things, items, cubes, widgets. And then if you bring it back to this other location, then you'll get paid. Players will bid on the contracts, and the bids are preset. They're predetermined on the contract, which makes the auctions go at a good clip. It's not going to just drag around and around and around. There's only like 4 or 5 possible bids that you can do. And of course, on your turn, you can raise or you can pass. I think if you pass, you can't get back in. The person who put it up for auction has the ability to stay in the auction by just tying the highest bid instead of dropping out, instead of having to raise it. I'll come back to that. It's a roll and move. Roll the dice, move your mice. In this case, trucks. So if a player lands on a city by exact count, then they get to choose one of the contracts up for auction, and then the bidding happens. So it's a nice little bit of interaction there, because a lot of pick up and deliver games are really, really solitaire-like. You're doing your own thing. You're moving your truck around. You're picking things up. You're dropping them off. But players are just passing each other, doing their own thing, right? It's kind of almost literally a multiplayer solitaire. Auf Achse avoids this in a couple different ways. One is the auctions that I mentioned before, so players are involved in the auction. They're trying to get those. And the other way is event cards. So there are event cards. There are spaces you can land on and draw an event, and the event will sometimes be a good thing, sometimes be a bad thing. Sometimes there's something that you can use to hurt another player, usually in the way of creating a traffic congestion or road construction, which basically all it does is it slows the other players down, or they have to take a longer route. It's minor, but it is kind of typical of games that came out around this time, which is, I think, late 80s. This game did win the Spiel des Jahres, and I think for the time, being the 80s, it's still a game that relatively holds up today. Like I said, I had the version that came out, I want to say 2007, so you can almost think of it as like a 20th anniversary edition. And I thought that game was great. It had a nice big board. It had these little big plastic trucks and little wooden cubes you put in. And it was a nice, charming little game. Now, the game does run a bit long, but at the same time, a good pick up and deliver game can't be too short. I've played some short pick up and deliver games, and they just felt pointless. You know, the fun in a pick up and deliver game is it's logistics, right? Just like, I guess, a real trucking company would have to deal with logistics, right? You know, go here and then go here, and then I can pick up these goods and then go there, and I get to do two things while I'm in kind of the south of Germany. The logistics that you're working out in your head of you know, finding the best kind of order to do things and the best routes to take, that's fun, but it doesn't really pay off unless the game has a bit of length to it, right? So you definitely want to keep this game short by playing with fewer players. 3 or 4 probably is great. I don't know if I'd play it with 2, but the way the auctions work, 2 player is okay too. But once you get to 5 or 6, it's gonna, unless you love the game. If you love the game, then you'll love it at any player count. And, you know, if the game takes 90 minutes, well, it's 90 minutes of fun, right? But for most people, I would probably suggest keep it at 3 or 4 players. So does it hold up today? That's the question, isn't it? Look, it's a different style of game. It's an older style game. It's a roll and move. There are a few elements that try to kind of smooth that over a little bit. For example, one of the numbers, I think it might be the 6, is wild. And in the 2007 edition, you roll 2 dice and you pick the result, right? So, you know, there's little things, but it's still, in the end, it's a roll and move game. And you know what? Roll and move games have been popular for a long time. And Monopoly, Clue, Parcheesi-like games, you know what? Those are still popular. It's a mechanism that everyone understands. You know, if you're going to play a roll and move game, I suggest playing this one. This one is a really good one. But in the end, it's still roll and move. So it's hard to say if it holds up. It is a game of a different time. And if you want a variety of games in your collection, maybe a good roll and move game isn't the worst thing to have. Right? It's some variety. And it's a really great game from the 80s that still holds up today if you are okay with the roll and move. But the next suggestion I'm covering this week is a game called Fjords. This was designed by the late Franz Benno de Lange. I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm afraid. And it was published originally by Hans im Glück, one of my favorite publishers, in the mid-2000s. In the mid-2000s, that's when I have a little bit of background here, because Fjords is a tile-laying game. And the reason I'm covering it, by the way, is because there's a new edition on Kickstarter. Old versions of this have been going for more money than it probably should. But because there's a new Kickstarter, it just started yesterday or today at the time I'm recording this, it's a tile-laying game. And that's important if you talk about the context that the game came out in. So the game came out in 2005. First of all, it's for 2 players only, although the new edition on Kickstarter will be 2 to 4 players. The 2-player game originally, I want to say it took about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less. And it's a super simple game. It's in some ways simpler than Carcassonne. So in terms of learning the game, 8 and up, absolutely. But it is a bit of a thinky game. So just be aware. You want... Younger kids are okay as long as they like to think and they don't get bored too easily. This game originally came out, I think, 2005. From my memory, this is like really Carcassonne was coming into its own, right? Carcassonne came out in 2000. Great tile-laying game, won Game of the Year. Of course, it had expansions. It had tons and tons of expansions since then, but it also had spin-offs. And so you had Hunters and Gatherers, and you had The Castle, which came out a few years after the original Carcassonne. But Carcassonne was very, very popular in the mid-2000s. And Carcassonne is best 2 players. So, and of course you had Carcassonne the Castle, which was a 2-player only spin-off of Carcassonne, which was probably 2003, 2004, and then 2005 was Fjords, 2-player game, actually by the same publisher, also by Hans im Glück. So a lot of comparisons. There's 2 halves to the game, okay? So it's a tile-laying game, and on your turn, in the original, you'll flip over a tile, and the tile will be a hexagon. It'll show some water and some land, and the land might be grass or mountains. And you have to place it somewhere if you're able to. And then you have the option of placing one of your houses, one of your long houses, I guess they call them. And so over the course of the game, you're going to build this kind of big play field, which all has to be connected. And then the second half of the game starts. And the second half of the game, you're claiming land connected to your longhouses. So on your turn, you're going to put down one of your pieces on a space next to your longhouse, or next to a space you already put a piece on a previous turn. So you're kind of growing the your land from your longhouses. So the first half of the game is this kind of lighthearted. You're building this kind of crazy landscape, but the important decision is when and where do you put a longhouse down. So here's the thing. It's really thinky, and I like that, right? Simple rules, but thinky. Hey, I'm all up in that. The thing about it is that the second half of the game is basically just resolving the first half of the game. It's thinky, but basically the game is decided in the first half. And then the second half, you got to go through the effort of putting down the pieces and claiming land. In a 2-player game, at least, it's, I claim this land, you claim that land. And it's just back and forth. And if you've played this game a lot, I bet after the first half of the game, you can just look at the board and say, okay, you won. You want to play again? The second half of the game almost feels unnecessary. For me, when it originally came out, it was in a weird place. Because on the one hand, it's really, really simple, 2-player game, but it's got some thought to it. And so it got mentioned a lot as, this is a great game to play with your non-gamer partner, right? It's rules light, and it has a charm to it. People like tile laying. Carcassonne is still enjoyed today. And it has what looks and feels like a light, breezy play. But if you play breezy, you will lose. And quite badly, too. It can be a rout in the second half of the game. If the first person, if the one player doesn't know what they're doing, they can just get destroyed due to poor placement in the first half of the game. But you still got to play through the second half and see you lose and lose and lose until the game is finally over, right? This should be a game that you should be okay with resigning from. For me, it ended up in a weird place because it looked and felt light and breezy and a possibly great game to play with my, at that time, non-gamer partner. Now I'd call her, she's a bit of a gamer now, after all the stuff I've introduced to her. But at the time, she was pretty picky and didn't really go for a lot of stuff, but, we liked Lost Cities, we liked Battle Line, Shot and Totten. So I was always looking for great 2-player games to play with her, and this one fell really flat. It can be hard for some people to foresee in the second half of the game where or why a good placement would be in the first half, and that would lead to the rout, and that could lead to a frustrating experience. It's great that it's thinky, and if you have like a like-minded person to play it with, I think it's great, but it is in that weird place where it's almost too light for hobbyists, but it's almost too heavy to play with anyone who's just casually into the hobby. Now, I want to talk about the second edition. Does it address some of my points? Yes and no. So, for one thing, it's 2 to 4 players. And actually, I think that will really open up the second half of the game. Because one thing I really like about, for example, Hey, That's My Fish. I don't know if you played it, but on your turn, you have multiple penguins. You're deciding which penguin to move. And when you're playing in a 3 or 4 player game, you have to prioritize. That becomes an important part of the game. It happens in 2 player as well, but it's more notable in 3 and 4 player. Should I go for that thing? I really want that thing, but is that my top priority right now? When my turn comes around again, maybe that'll still be there. Maybe it's more important to cut this person off. And I think you'd have those same decisions in Fjords. So I'm really looking forward to trying this 3 or 4 players. There's new art. The cover art by Beth Sobel is fantastic. Apparently she also did the tiles. They look fine, but this game doesn't need fancy art on the tiles, okay? You're just seeing 3 different colors on a small hexagon tile. It's you don't need fancy art on that. Wooden pawns instead of discs from the first edition. Of course, presumably it's going to be in a bigger box. Now, the designer has passed away, but another designer, Phil Walker Harding, has lent his talents to the new edition of Fjords by the way of tweaking a couple things. So one is that instead of just drawing a tile randomly and then having to play it, now there's always 4 face-up tiles, and you get to choose which one. Now, that makes it even thinkier. So that's really going in the direction of, remember when I said before about Fjords? It's like, it's almost a game that doesn't know what it wants to be. It's not ideal for casual gamers, and it's not ideal for hobbyists. So that change might move it up to the side of the hobby side. There are some kind of little expansions like runestones or something. Usually I have 0 interest in those. Maybe they're great. It's extra content. You have to have extra content, right? One thing is that in a 3 or 4 player game, you actually have to take out certain tiles. And it's not just like, oh, take out just X number of tiles. It's no, you have to take out particular tiles. If you're playing with 3 players, take out these 4 player tiles. And those 2 players also take out the 3 player tiles. I assume the back is marked in some way. That's going to be a pain in the butt. But otherwise, I'm looking forward to Fjords. The game is good, was good, and will still be good, I assume, because they're not really changing a whole lot in the game. And importantly, you can still play the old way if you want to. Nothing's stopping you. Its ratings are kind of on BoardGameGeek, like a 6.7, I think, something like that. But the fact is that people who get it don't get rid of it. And now there are people who are like trying to find the game and they can't, and it's going for crazy prices on the aftermarket. So this is coming out at a great time. No reason to pay a lot of money for the old edition unless you're only going to play it 2-player and you care about the shelf space, because the original 2-player version would be much smaller. But otherwise, yeah, check out the Kickstarter. Fjords is a very good game, but again, note some caveats there. This is an all suggestion week, and the third game that's been suggested that I'm going to go over this week as sort of a mini gem is Triumvirate. This is actually a game I have, or we have it at the restaurant, so I don't have to show you the but I will in a second. I'll replace this with a proper graphic. It's designed by Travis Worthington and was published by his company Indie Boards and Cards. It's for 2 players only, takes about half hour to play, and I'm not sure what the box says actually. 13 up, yeah, no, I mean, I would say maybe 9 and up. So this is a trick-taking game, a 2-player trick-taking game. There aren't that many out there. I know there's a newer game called Fox in the Forest, which I have not played. There's also Haggis, which is not a trick-taking game, it's a climbing game. Very important difference. Local designer too, Haggis. Maybe I should do that for the channel. So first of all, let me say that the description of the game, I'm sold. I'm sold on the game based on the description and based on a description of how it plays, not just thematically, but what you're doing in relation to the theme. So you have the triumvirate, right? You have Caesar, or is it Caesar, and Pompey and Crassus. And you have presumably legions that you want to dedicate to one of the 3 triumvirs. Am I saying that right? But you don't know who to back yet, right? Who's going to win in this clash? So you're kind of playing a wait and see who's going to come out on top. But of course, the player who is earlier able to kind of see what direction things are headed and can dedicate their legions and back the right horse is going to come out on top. Brilliant. And the way the game plays really matches that theme and setting. So there's a deck of cards, and they come in 3 suits. So each suit represents one of the 3 triumvirs. They're numbered 0 to 8, I think. And a couple of the higher valued ones are legions. And those are ones that after every round, you have an opportunity to set one from your hand aside, putting it kind of face down to the side, and you're setting that aside till the end of the game. At the end of the game, you can only dedicate 3 cards, or pledging it's called in the game. You can only pledge up to 3 cards over the course of the whole game. The game will last at least 3 rounds, but as many as 7. And over the course of that game, at the end of every round, including the last round, you have an opportunity to pledge a legion by putting the card face down. Now that takes that card out of the game, and the legions are often very powerful cards, so you're actually weakening your hand by doing that. But if you're right, and that triumvirate wins, and you like the one that matches that suit, then you're going to come out on top. So that works great in terms of fitting the mechanisms with the setting. Problem is, we didn't find the game fun. And oh no. So what is fun? Why is a game fun? Why isn't it? It's tough to say, but I will say a couple of problems that we had with the game. Firstly, the first part of the game is pointless. It's like literally pointless. At the beginning of the game, all 3 triumvirs are on equal footing, and you play a hand, and the first suit to win 3 tricks then becomes then wins the round, and then you move one of that triumvir's tokens to a little scoring board, right? And you just keep playing like that. So the first of those 3, the triumvirs, to get 3 tokens on that board is going to be the winner of the power struggle, and then you look and see who backed the right horse the most. But at the beginning of the game, they're all on equal footing. And so you're given a hand of cards, and you're winning tricks or losing tricks, and there's no real reason for it, right? Like, you want to see who's doing well, which triumvirate is doing well, so that later on you can think about pledging to back that person. But at the beginning of the game, it's all equal, so you have no purpose. You can win tricks and you can lose tricks, but there's no benefit to you either way. Through your play, you can help one of the triumvirs do well, help them win suits. And if you're heavily invested in black, which I think is Crassus, then you want later on more black cards to win tricks, right? So that works, and that works later in the game. But that first part of the game, like the first maybe even third of the game, is just, you're just playing cards, and okay, get rid of the cards, oh, play another card, oh, get rid of that. Because at the beginning of the game, you're not backing a horse, right? So that first part, just completely pointless. And there is, or what I thought was, an interesting kind of bit of interplay with the suits. So each suit, there's no trump suit. Instead, each suit has a 0 card. It's called the mob. And the 0 card of a suit will always lose to other cards of the same suit because it's the lowest value of that suit. But it beats another suit, even if it's high. So the mob becomes, the 0 card becomes, I thought that would be interesting, right? Oh, you think you're winning that trick with your 8 card, but I play a mob. The thing is, you have to follow suit if you can. And hands are usually pretty big. You have a lot of cards. The only way you can play a mob and have it win a trick is by somebody playing a card of a color and you don't have that color. Or, I mean, you can lead with the mob too, that works. But at the beginning of the game, for example, you have this huge hand of cards. I don't know how many it is, 11 cards or something big like that, 13. And of course, you're going to get a mix of everything, aren't you? You're going to get a bunch of yellows, bunch of blacks, bunch of reds. Some are high, some are low. Again, no real direction, right, with these cards, but also no real opportunity to play those mobs. It's not interesting. You don't have that opportunity to play the interesting mob and kind of have something different happen than what you would expect, right? So there really wasn't enough of that sort of interplay. And we really did not enjoy our time. I mean, it was, fine, right? A way to kill time, and we're trash talking each other a little bit, but we can make any game fun if you play it like that. Like, as a positive, Triumvirate as a 2-player trick-taking game works, and I like how the mechanisms are kind of just lean toward the setting. That's what I like. Of course, it's an abstract game with 3 suits and numbers, right? But the way it plays, you kind of just have that taste of the setting of the triumvirate, and actually that works well. So when I was approaching this game, I was all in, but the game fell really flat for us. There may very well be some subtle strategy that comes into play after you play it 5 games, 10 games. We're never going to get there. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. The ratings on BoardGameGeek are high 6s. That's still pretty good. And you may have a better experience with it than we did. I can just share our own opinion. So it's not a game that I would want to cover as a board gem, but I thought I'd give it a quick overview because it was suggested for the channel. So there are some quick gems for you. Auf Achse, Fjords, and Triumvirate. I hope you like this format. I'm not going to do this every week. The idea is a little bit of a low effort post that I can do once in a while, and I can go over some of the, especially some of the suggestions that I don't think I'll ever get around to, or if I do, a long time from now. But if you have different opinions on the game, let me know, or if you have other suggestions that I can cover, feel free to suggest them, and hopefully I'll get to them soon. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.